Marriage, hey, it happens all the time when that marriage ceremony takes place. Does that mean the marriage is in fact in place? Well, that takes us to this week's case. Involves a real couple in the state of Missouri, and for the purposes of this, we will call the wife Judy. Judy had previously been married. She'd been married to a guy named James Anderson, and she lived in Texas. Well, things didn't go well in that marriage, and she and James split company. She subsequently met another guy who, for the purposes of this case, we'll call Daryl. She and Daryl hit it off, and they decided to get married, so they headed off to Las Vegas. Now, they did this after Judy was relatively assured that her divorce from James in Texas was final. So she and Daryl head off to Las Vegas. They get married. They come back. They live in Texas for a number of years. They then head off to Michigan, and then they go to Missouri. Well, what Judy didn't know during these years was the fact that the marriage in Las Vegas to Daryl took place 9 months before the divorce was final in Texas. So she was technically still married to James when she married Daryl. Well, now they're living in Missouri a number of years later, and things didn't go well there. And so they start to live separate and apart, and then they file for divorce. And now with all of that taking, of course, Daryl is being asked to pay child support, spousal support. And then he does some research and finds out that, in fact, Judy was married at the time he married her in Las Vegas. So it was a bigamous marriage. Bigamous marriages are void, and he argued that through his attorney, saying, look at this, she was already married when we got married, and therefore our marriage is void from the beginning. From the very beginning, it's void, never counted. Well, the trial court listened to these arguments and said, yeah, you know, I look at this, I look at the law in Texas, I look at the law in Missouri, and I find that in both cases, if someone is married at the time they marry someone else, that's a bigamous relationship, and it makes the later marriage void. Okay, well, Judy wasn't happy with this, so she appealed the case. She appealed the case, went up on appeal to an appellate court in Missouri, and there the court heard arguments from Judy in which she said, in this instance, my marriage in Texas was an informal marriage. Well, Texas has a definition of informal marriage, and what it is basically a definition that a lot of states have for what's referred to as putative marriages. And in this instance, Texas says that if someone had an intent to engage in a marriage, they went through a ceremony, they did something else that indicated their strong desire to be married, as these two people did when they went to Las Vegas, and if they then lived together as husband and wife, which they did when they were living in Texas, they wore wedding bands, they filed joint tax returns, and they held themselves out as being a married couple, and they said, we are married. And if these factors exist, then there is an informal marriage. And the appellate court said, in view of this, we have to consider whether or not this was a bigamous marriage, the marriage that took place in Las Vegas, or whether, in fact, that was a marriage that was, as Texas defines, an informal marriage. Court looked at Texas law, reviewed it, and said, well, in this instance, we find that Texas law defines their relationship between Judy and Daryl as an informal marriage, and accordingly, under the U.S. Constitution full faith and credit clause, we have to acknowledge that situation, and we find that when they were in Missouri, they were considered to be in this informal marriage, and accordingly, we find the marriage did exist, even though the marriage took place 9 months before a final divorce. We find that they are, in fact, husband and wife, and Daryl, guess what? You do owe spousal support, you do owe child support, because we find that you were married. Okay, well, we found a couple of interesting things in this case. We found that if somebody gets married when they are already married, that's void at the beginning. But we also find there are some exceptions to that, as we find in Texas, and in some states, as I say, there's a similar situation with regard to putative spouses. Now, this is all going to vary from state to state, because remember, folks, we are not the United States of America. We are 50 states united, and each state can go about things in their own way, and we see an example of that here. Okay, bringing you this case, we bring cases every week so you understand how the law works. I'm David Allen.